Hi, and welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll. Today's episode is dedicated to a dear friend of mine, John Berg. He lost his battle with multiple myeloma today, and I want to dedicate this episode to him and his wife, Alicia Berg, his kids, Amanda Berg and Jordan Berg.
Welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Hidden History of Rock and Roll.
Hello and welcome to Hidden History of Rock and Roll. I'm your host, Tiffany Scott. If you are new to my podcast, I do a deep dive into the behind-the-scenes stories of rock's greatest legends, how they came to be, how the records got played, and maybe some dirty secrets if we are lucky. This is your all-access backstage pass. Today, I am welcoming to the show a recording engineer and producer for over 40 years. He has credits on over 120 albums. He is most known for his work with Tom Petty, George Harrison, and ELO. He has been mixing immersive audio since 2004, starting with the Concert for George, one of my favorites, in 5.1. He has a Grammy nomination for Best Immersive Audio Album, a Primetime Creative Arts Emmy nomination for Outstanding Sound Mixing in a Variety Series or Special. Variety magazine named Wildflowers and All the Rest the Best Box Series of 2020. It was also certified as a gold record by the RIAA. He also co-produced Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' Hypnotic Eye album, which, fun fact, was their only #1 Billboard charted album, and nominated for the 2015 Best Rock Album Grammy. He is an incredible solo album artist, and his album is called Act 3. Please welcome to the show, Ryan Ulyate.
Hello.
Hey, Ryan.
Here we are.
How's it going? I'm going to have my engineer add in some applause there.
Oh, good. Okay. And watch your P's. Don't get too close to the mic. This is my thing. I heard a couple P's in your intro.
I heard that too. And it's very nerve-wracking that I'm here. I'm not an engineer, and I'm here with my the engineer extraordinaire. And, I'm trying to be all perfect for you.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining me today.
Sure.
And for those who don't know you, please tell our guests how you became an engineer, how you got started in the industry.
Well, my dad was a clarinet player in the 20th Century Fox Orchestra. So I grew up in a musical family, and he was a clarinet player in the Fox Orchestra from 1949 to 1970. And worked on all those great films, Cleopatra, The Sound of Music, all these, with Alfred Newman, the great composer and director. And when I was a kid, I discovered a tape recorder he had in his closet, because he also had his own cult band called the Hollywood Saxophone Quartet. Oh, wow. And there was 4 guys who were just top-notch players, and they would just kind of test themselves and their sight reading by playing all these really difficult pieces. Wow. So they had a tape recorder so they could record their rehearsals and listen back. And I think I was about maybe 6 or 7 years old, and I just saw this thing in the closet. And I just remember holding up that microphone. The first time I saw it, it was like the ape in 2001. It's like when you pick up the bone, it's like, wait a minute, this is powerful. So he told me how to work it, and I threaded up, and I recorded my sisters and their cousins, my sisters and their best friends. They had a singing group, my older sisters, and so I recorded their singing group, the Core Eights.
Oh, fun!
Because the $2 were from a guy named Richie Cornell, who was a drummer in the Fox Orchestra, and then Ulyate. So they called themselves the Core Eights.
Oh, that's
so 2 of my sisters and 2 of Richie's daughters, and I learned. Then and there, when I listened back to it, it was making this funny noise. And I realized that I was subconsciously scratching the mic.
Oh, my God.
So I learned my first lesson of engineering. Don't Don't do that.
Don't
the whole
do that.
recording. Yeah. So after that,
You learned by trial and error.
I learned by trial and error, and after that, I just started. I was always into tape recorders. When cassettes came out, my mom and dad bought me a cassette thing, and then I got older, and I turned about 13, and I got a TIAC reel-to-reel it had a thing where you could go bounce back and forth between tracks, so you could kind of get more than one track on it. You record on one track, and then you could add that and record onto another track. So Sound on Sound, it was called.
Okay.
And it was a TIAC A1500U. You can Google it.
Google.
And
are we plugging Google here?
Well, you can search for it on the search engine of your choice.
Okay, there you go.
And I messed around with that, and that's right when I started playing in a garage band in my youth.
Oh, how fun!
I learned how to play drums and bass and guitar, and someone taught me how to play some chords on the piano. So I became kind of a self-taught musician. And our band, which was called Rock On in Newport Beach.
Oh,
yeah. So I used that to record them, and I kept on playing with it. At some point, I had to turn in a report to my history class, and I ended up making a radio play and getting all my friends to join in with me. And it was loosely based on historical stuff.
Oh, how fun.
But it was more just fun.
Okay.
And I put it together. I added sound effects and stuff.
How fun.
And I got an A+ on it. So,
that's great.
So I realized, wow, this tape recorder thing could be my ticket into something else.
And you started thinking, I can make some money with this, or
Yeah,
I can make a career of this.
Yeah, and it just never occurred to me. And at some point, I went to this school. I was in high school, and someone said to me, Ryan, you have a great radio voice.
You do.
Yeah, you should try to be a DJ. And so I went to this school. I forget what it was called, but it was on Hollywood Boulevard. And it was this school where they teach you how to be a DJ. Right?
You're kidding.
No. And so I went to this school, and the guy is, they started, I'm going to teach you how to be a DJ. And he said, so say something, Ryan. I said, well, I'd like to be a DJ. He says, well, you've got what it takes. So.
And that'll be $200.
Exactly. And I'm looking at it, and I got back home, and I thought, you know what? I don't really want to be a DJ. I want to be a recording engineer, because I found out that you could be a recording engineer.
Great.
Right? You could be the guy who sits behind the glass in the control room. Yeah, and control is what it's all about.
Being in charge.
So I even though I had the opportunity to do that, and then my mom knew some guy who was an engineer. He said, well, you don't really want to do engineering. There's only a couple of people who do that. You really want to get into doing acoustic treatments and learn how to do soundproofing and stuff. And I'm like all of 14. I'm like, I don't want to do soundproofing. No. I don't want to be a DJ. I want to be a recording engineer. And I just figured I could do it.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That is awesome. And what was your big break into recording?
Well, I went to college, and then at that point, I was my sister had a house up in Washington State near Auburn, Washington. And she had a funky trailer in the back, and I rented the trailer and went to this community college. And my mom bought me a TIAC 3340S with Simulsync, which is I still have it.
Do you really?
It's a 4-track machine on a 1/4-inch, but it was the first real machine that people got that you could do really cool stuff with, because Simulsync meant that you could monitor off the record head and add more tracks, and that's the way you do it professionally. That way, there's no gap. Exactly. Okay. So I wrote all the music for all these musicals that were being produced by. We had a director of the drama department, and they wrote an original play called Yankee Doodles, which toured in the summer of '76. We toured it all around Washington and Oregon and California, and then I went back. I was a musical director. I wrote songs for it, and then I went back and I had everybody come into my little shed in my funky trailer and re-record everything. And sometimes I take my tape recorders out and we'd record them in larger places. And I put that demo together thinking, boy, I'm going to hit LA, and they're just going to think I'm the bomb. Mm-hmm. and I hit LA, and it's like nobody cared about my, they'd take the tape and just throw it on the pile with everything else, So I got my foot in the door in the studio just because I was willing to do whatever it takes. And that's one of my, my advice to people up and coming. It's like, I met the boss of the studio, and he was a really kind of a hardcore producer and kind of a rough kind of guy, not polished.
Okay.
Let's put it this way. But, he had a studio, and he said, you know anything? And I said, well, I know how to record a few things. He goes, do you know how to align a 24 track? I said, no. And he goes, well, you don't know shit, do you?
Oh, you're serious?
Yeah. And I went, yeah, but I'm willing to learn. And you know what? You make records here, right? I don't want to do anything else. I want to make records, okay? And I'll do whatever it takes.
So awesome.
And the guy goes, whatever it takes? I said, yeah. And he goes, okay, clean up the reception room. And I did. I cleaned up the reception room. I detailed the reception room.
Oh.
And then that night they invited me into the studio to run the tape machine.
Great.
And I got my foot in the door.
Got your foot in the door.
And I lived in that studio for about a year and a half, 2 years before I moved on to another job. And I got the education of a lifetime. Yeah. And I just thought to myself, okay, I didn't go in the Army. This is the Army. I am just going to learn this thing, and I'm going to deal with all these situations. And it's an emotional thing when you're making records. People can kind of freak out. You can see some really weird kind of, reactions. Sometimes people get mad. Sometimes they're screaming at each other. And sometimes it's really cool, and it's just like, wow.
Wow.
So in that 2 years, I saw so many producers come in, and I really learned a lot about how to make a record and a lot about how to not make a record.
Wow.
So
you took it all in.
Oh God, it was an education. It was such an amazing thing.
That is awesome.
It was, I learned everything. I got really lucky because one of the first sessions I did was for a French artist who came up from Paris, and they wanted to record in LA. Because LA was kind of like a cool place. We had good musicians, and people, international kind of people would come here. And I think that the guy who owned the studio had a relationship with somebody at Areola Records, and they had a relationship with more of an international kind of a clientele. So they found this studio. I recorded this tracking date, which is when you record the drums and the bass and the guitar and the piano and keyboards, usually 4 or 5 pieces. That's where you get the basic track. And this is my first tracking date, and I was just thrilled doing it. I recorded it. I finished the album. Finished the song, actually. I had so much fun. They took it back to France, and they played it for the people in France. They said, okay, they can do the whole album. They came back and did the album. That song is called Manu Reva. It went to #1 in France and Belgium, and it's called Benelux. I think it's like this certain area of Europe. And it sold over 1 million records. So that happened. The other thing that happened was this Mexican artist came in and did an album, and I didn't know anything about it. I didn't speak Spanish, but it was really fun doing it, and we got along well. And kind of realized at some point music is universal.
Music is music.
Yeah. But the one thing that I did learn from that is the producer on that album was really, the most important thing to him was making sure people understood the vocal. Yeah. So we had early automation back then. We had what was it called? Not flying faders, but anyway, we had an automation system where you could move the fader and record the fader moves, and then it would play back what you did. And he taught me that with the Spanish, especially, if they go te quiero or something ends with an R, that kind of thing, you've got to push all that stuff so you hear everything. So I learned at that point to really follow the vocal and make sure that you got that right. That album went out. The artist won, Gabriel, and it went out to sell. It's called Recuerdos, and it went out to sell millions.
Wow.
And so after that, I got a bunch of Spanish artists, and Latin artists.
Great.
And I got a bunch of French artists. And at that point, I became independent.
Okay.
And that was it.
And that's how you kept going. Now,
yeah,
we have, how did you get involved going forward with Tom Petty? He's been one of your main people. Any hidden histories there of how you got involved?
It's not that hidden. I mean, it's funny. In a way, my career, was always just people who knew people that recommended people. It was kind of like it's almost like serial monogamy in a way. You know, I've got a couple of big artists that I would just work with. I did a bunch of stuff with Juan Gabriel. I ended up moving to El Paso and helping him put a studio together, and did some of their albums with other artists he was producing. And then that kind of came and went. And then I got involved with a guy who I just met last night again for the first time in a while. His name is Craig Harris. And he was involved with this thing. He was doing sound design, which is like, whoa, you know, it's like not sound effects, it's sound design. And he had this box called a synclavier, which was like the early digital synthesizer. And it was the first thing that I saw that you could actually, it had an option where you could record to hard disk.
Oh, wow.
Like, wow. And you know, and it was, you could record 8 channels, direct to disk, they called it. And so I really learned all that digital technology. And I jumped into that and learned all about that. And that lasted for a while. And then my friend Mark Mann, who was somebody that I hired to work on some of the Juan Gabriel albums because I needed a guy who knew about MIDI and computers and sequencing. And, you know, it's 1984 and 1985, and we got to know this stuff now.
Yeah.
And Mark was just the genius about that. So I brought him into El Paso. We did some sessions, and we became friends. And then he calls me up and he says, "Hey, Jeff Lynne is looking for an engineer."
Just Jeff Lynne.
Yeah, and I'm kind of like, well, you know, I'm producing now, but Jeff Lynne, okay. I'll go see him.
Can you imagine?
So I go to Jeff Lynne's, and Mark introduces me, and Jeff has a house up in the hills, and he's got a studio up in his house, and he said, "Well, you know, I want to record some vocals." And it's like, okay. So this is a good little nugget. I think I can say this.
Okay.
So I'm doing, and he's on tape, right? And I was all digital. Now we're back to tape, and I just forgot how much fun tape is. Okay. You know, because you rewind. I mean, in a way, the thing about tape is it makes you think a little bit more about what you're doing because you have to stop and rewind and find the place and then go back and do something, you know, so you're not quite as ADD about it. You know, it's like you know, he'd do a vocal and then he'd want to do a harmony, and he was doing a harmony part, and, you know, he's figuring it out, da, da, da. And I said, "Jeff, what if it goes da, da, da?" And I sang some kind of melody to it, right? And there's a big pause. He goes, "I don't do jazz." And I'm like, oh, that's right. My job is to shut up.
Yeah, and listen to you.
Yeah, not say anything and just be a facilitator for the thing to come through.
Yeah.
So at the end of the session, we do the vocals. End of the session, I looked down and I realized that I'd left one of the tracks in record, and I'd erased a vocal of his.
Oh, no.
So I said, "Hey, Jeff, I got to tell you, you know, it was wonderful knowing you."
Great time today.
It was a great time today. I did erase that vocal. I'm sure, you know, I'm sorry. I know I'm not coming back. He goes, "It's okay. I can record it again." And again, then he goes, "Nice. So what are you doing tomorrow?" Oh. And that's how it went.
He's a nice guy.
Great guy. I learned so much from him. Yeah. And funny as hell. And just got to meet I got to, you know, he's like, "Hey, Ringo's coming by tomorrow. Can you make it?" Well, yeah, I think I can.
I think I can be there.
Yeah, and then at some point,
clear my schedule.
I met George, and then at some point I met Paul, and it's like, God, I got to meet so many of my heroes with this guy. And then the way it led to Tom is that we got to work on George's last album that he worked on until he passed, and it was called Brainwashed. And he'd just about finished it, but he hadn't quite finished it all the way. And Danny Harrison, his son, and Olivia, his wife, came to L.A. And we, Danny, Jeff, and myself, worked on finishing up the album. And it was just such a wonderful thing. It's such a good album. George was such an amazing guy. And that album came out, and after that, they decided to do a memorial concert for George. The concert for George. And Eric Clapton was going to be the guy who was a musical director. They had booked some time at the Albert Hall in London to do it. They had all sorts of people and great artists. And they were all, the thing about it is they were all George's best friends. You know, it wasn't just a bunch of kind of randos. This is his people.
Core.
Yeah.
His core
Yeah.
people.
And they're all involved in it. And then Eric asked Jeff if he could be involved in doing the recording and the mixing and, you know, the making the album of it and the music for the video, the film they made. And I think, you know, I'm like, please say yes, Jeff.
Like,
we can do it. We can do it. It's going to be great.
Want.
It's going to be great. So he said yes. You know, and as you know from Mark Mann,
yes.
Once again, he was working with Jeff at the same time.
Right.
And he got in the band and impressed Eric Clapton enough to where he was right there front and center, you know, right there with the main core band. And one of the other bands that was there, basically it was a house band that had other people come in. So basically it was Henry Spinetti, which was Eric's drummer, and Eric and rhythm section. And then other people would show up. So, you know, Billy Preston came along and you know, various people. And you can just look up Concert for George.
Yeah.
They're all there, you know.
Yep. I've done extensive research from interviewing Mark, and it was an incredible show.
Yeah. And one of the bands that showed up was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. But Tom, they asked him if he'd show up. He goes, yeah, but I don't want to play with the house band. I want my own band for this. If we're going to do a couple songs, I want my band with me. Mm-hmm. So they came over. They flew over. They were part of the show. We did the show. We recorded the show. Did just an amazing job. You know, it really was. There was actually 2 trucks to do it, and actually, there's one other little thing about the recording of that show. I just basically was like, just make sure we record everything. I don't care if you have a good mix, just don't miss anything.
Don't miss it.
And they did an amazing job. And there was one track that we kept open. We recorded on 48-track digital, and there was one mic and one track that was open the whole thing, and that was Should Bob Dylan Show Up? And no, Mark said this. There was a Bob Dylan contingency on the band side. We had it on the recording side as well.
Oh wow!
Yeah,
that's incredible. The Zimmerman.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of Mark's way of doing it. But it was a great show. We took everything back, put it all into Pro Tools, which was kind of difficult at the time.
Wow.
Coming off a 48-track digital, which was tape machines, Sony 3348 HR. For you tech fans.
Yes, there are some here.
You put a 48K and 24-bit, really posh. There was only 4 of them in Europe, and we got them all.
Oh wow, that's really
for
cool.
this show. Yeah.
That is really cool.
Yeah. And we took it back. We spent a lot of time mixing it.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of time, because there was so much there. The first half of the show was Ravi Shankar. And he'd written an entire orchestral piece, you know.
It was beautiful.
And it was beautiful. And I think it's called Arpan. And I remember mixing it. It's just like, you know, you've got all these tracks and you hear this thing going, it's like, what's that? You know, where's that thing? Okay. You know, it goes there. And, you know, this is just terrible. I don't even know what these instruments are. But I know that it's the solo thing. So we spent a lot of time just trying to find out where these things were and have this thing. Because Ravi would have the lead melody like trade off between all these instruments. And it's such a beautiful piece of music when you listen to it.
Yes.
But we spent a lot of time mixing it. And the good news with that is that if you take your time mixing this stuff, you're able to get all these little subtleties, you know, stuff you could never catch live. You know, the odd little phrase that kind of gets buried. You know, we just bring everything out and bring it to the front. So we finished the mix, and we finished the Tom Petty Heartbreakers part, and Jeff said, well, I'm going to call up Tom, and he wants to come over and listen. So Tom comes over and listen, and I'm nervous. Like, he's sitting right there, you know, in the front of the board. I'm kind of behind him. I don't, you know, we turn it up. We kind of stand back and just hope that he likes it. You know, and he turns around and he goes, I don't know what you guys did, but this sounds great. It's like, oh, good.
Well, well,
So,
that was the response we were looking for.
Exactly. So kind of right after that, I got a call from Tom's manager, And he said, hey, Tom's wondering if you wanted to just do, he's got another little thing he wants to do. Can you do that? And I
Tony.
said, sure. Yeah, Tony. Yeah, Tony Dimitriadis. And I said, sure, yeah. I'm not working that day. I can do it. So I just kind of got pulled into Tom's world a little more. And
fabulous.
Yeah. And then we got involved in this. The first thing I really got involved with him was a film called Running Down a Dream, which was the
animated?
No, it was a documentary about the whole Heartbreakers, about the whole. I think at that point it was the 30th anniversary or so. So this is like maybe 2006-ish. And so they took all this footage that they had, and they're going to make a documentary about the band, and they got Peter Bogdanovich to be the director. And so they needed a bunch of music to go be in the background. They wanted instrumental music. So when they're doing a montage or something, there's some kind of music. And I think it was probably Tom's idea. It's like, well, why don't we just go back to our tape library? We did a lot of jams. So we could probably just find some of those jams and mix them. So that was my first dive into the tape library. And Tom had an amazing tape library, kept all his outtakes. It had only gave the label what they needed, the masters, but all the other outtakes were in his library. They were very well cataloged. Bugs, his right-hand man, did an amazing job of keeping track of everything.
Yeah.
So I started looking through the listings of all these tapes, and anything that said jam,
you knew.
I'd pull the tape, and we'd bake it, because you have to bake tapes.
Okay.
Yeah, you know about that, don't you?
No,
you don't
I
know.
don't.
Okay, well, to give you a quick little aside. 24-track tapes, tapes that were basically from the 80s and 90s. What happens is when you store them for a long time, a tape is basically, it's got a plastic backing, it's got some glue that holds metal oxide on the tape, and then the metal oxide is what records the sound, the little magnets. That's how it works.
Always wondered.
So what happens over time is the glue that holds the metal oxide migrates to the front of the tape where the metal oxide is, and the tape becomes sticky. So if you try and play it on a tape recorder, you push play and it goes, and it stops because it can't pass through all the guides and stuff. So what you learn to do, and somebody discovered this, if you bake the tape, if you put a tape in an oven and you set it for about 130 degrees, and you put it in the oven for a 24-track, if you put it in the oven for about 10 hours,
oh my gosh.
It brings all that glue and it pushes it back to where the glue belongs, and then you can play a tape.
Okay, how did they discover that?
I learned this, that I don't know, I must have learned it at the time. That I knew there's a whole thing about everybody who was trying to play stuff back and it was just not working. And then I read online and someone said, well,
screw it, we're going to bake it.
The article was called, "If I Knew You Were Coming, I Would Have Baked a Tape."
That's funny.
And so I got myself an industrial oven. Okay. So anyway, bake the tapes, transfer them over.
Wow.
And so that was kind of my first big project for them.
Okay.
And then after that, one of the things that happened in the movie is they were talking about Tom's original band, and they had some of the interviews with some of the guys in his original band. And one of the guys was Tom Ledden, who was a guitar player from Florida, Bernie Ledden's brother. And there was a drummer named Randall Marsh, who was another the drummer in Mudcrutch. And so they're talking about the early parts of it. And somehow in the process of making this film, Tom got this idea, wow, it would be fun to make an album with that band again, with those guys. And so he came up with this idea to make this Mudcrutch album. And he figured the band is going to be Tom, but Tom on bass, because he played bass back then. And then it's Mike Campbell on guitar, Ben Tench on keyboards, Randall Marsh on drums, and Tom Ledden on guitar as well. So those are the two guitars. And so he said to me, look, I don't want to intimidate these guys by having them show up into us going to a commercial studio and have them wear headphones and everything. Can we just take my rehearsal space? Because he had a rehearsal space out in the valley where they just kept the gear and they'd rehearse before the shows.
The clubhouse?
Yeah, the clubhouse.
Okay.
So could we take the clubhouse and turn it into a studio? And luckily, Pro Tools had gotten to the point where you could do that. And Avid or DigiDesign at the time came up with this live board where you could mix live sound, or you can mix for these guys in their rehearsal. Like they didn't wear headphones, so it's like they're rehearsing for stage. They had little wedges and stuff like that. They're just hearing themselves in the room.
Okay.
You can mix for that, but all the inputs go straight through that into Pro Tools.
That's cool.
Yeah. So we
Really
made
cool.
it. We made this thing where they were playing and rehearsing, thinking they were just rehearsing, and they were.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have headphones on. It didn't feel like a studio. It felt like they're just playing. But I could record the whole thing, and the leakage was to the point where it wasn't that bad. And we made an album.
Wow. That is.
He invited them over. They stayed at his house, Tom and Randall.
And which album was that?
It's called Mudcrutch.
Mudcrutch.
And that album was just one of the most beautiful and fun things I've ever done. And then at the end of the album, it's like, we're listening to it, and I said, "That's pretty good." He goes, "God, it's great." I said, "Hey, Tom, I was kind of thinking, I kind of did a lot on this. I was thinking maybe I could be co-producer." He looks at me and goes, "I was thinking the same thing." I'm like, "Oh my God, I love this
Thank
guy."
God.
So I got promoted to co-producer on that, and then kept going like that.
Kept going and going.
Yeah.
And so most recently, in October of 2024, we'll jump ahead a little bit.
Yeah.
The Tom Petty Estate has released the Long After Dark Deluxe Edition. You remastered the original 1982 album, and you discovered 12 additional tracks.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that like working with the tracks, but posthumously?
Well, we started this a while back. Tom passed back in 2017, and the first thing we started working on was an expanded version of Wildflowers. And Tom was working on that at the time, wanted that to come out, and so we did that. And as you're doing it, it's really it's kind of strange, because you're listening to stuff, and I can hear this voice in my head, in the back over my shoulder, just going, nah. Or, yeah, that's good. It's almost like he was there, because I spent so much time with him. I think that's what we're all doing with the estate, with Adria, and Ben and Mike and Dana and everybody. We're all trying to do our best to honor what the guy would want, and make sure that anything that gets put out is really good and up to that standard. So it's really interesting. In a lot of ways, he hasn't left, because he's still coming out of the speakers. And I love the idea of finding these things. I love going through this stuff and finding material.
Yeah.
And he's so good. And, even his stuff, even his B material I think it's a lot better than some people's A material.
Yeah, it's the coolest. It's like he's relaxed.
Yeah.
And it just, letting it out there. It's not like something that has to be done. And that's kind of can be your best work, you know. But I think Adria and Dana and everybody who is working on the estate is really doing a great job trying to keep his music relevant. I don't know about you, but my boyfriend Neil Bird watches football, and you can hear his music obviously on the Gators game when they do their their intermission, and they all sing "I Won't Back Down." You can hear it just on the Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football. They'll play the country album, and actually, my cousin Paul Sidoti, my cousin-in-law. His wife, Ashley White, works for the record label who put out the country album. And it's amazing how so many lives are intertwined with Tom. He's everywhere, and then they put his song on the video game. There's just so many great things that is keeping him going. And I wanted to give them a shout out myself, you know. But the Long After Dark album, the deluxe edition, what was that like? Continued on that conversation.
Well, it was just so fun to go through this stuff and find this material, and bring it to life. And and I worked with Adria on the sequencing of it and picking the tracks, and I think it's really great. I think it's just so great to bring these things out. That album, the story behind that album is there was kind of two albums. One was a little folkier, and one could have been more rock. Mm-hmm. And they kind of went with the more rock kind of tracks on the original album, so which meant that for the extra stuff, we could go and find those other kind of folkier tracks. Mm-hmm. So it gives you a really good perspective of the totality of where Tom and the band were at that point.
Yeah.
There's just, the thing about the Heartbreakers, Petty, their musical influences were deep. And they had really deep influences, so they knew how to play all these old songs because, they started out as a cover band, right? Mm-hmm. So the Mudcrutch was just a cover band. They had to go to the jukebox and learn this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think it was Benmont or somebody had a tape recorder, so they'd play one track in the jukebox and then they'd record it, so then they could have it, then they could go back and learn it.
Oh, fun!
So these guys know so much different types of music. Mm-hmm. They could find old covers and just drop into them, or they could just jam in a certain style. Mm-hmm. So it was a really deep well for them to draw upon.
And they never put out anything that was the same or just churning out the same thing.
I can tell you when we did later on, after we did the Mudcrutch album at the Clubhouse, then we did the Mojo album at the Clubhouse, mm-hmm. and then we did another album called Hypnotic Eye at the Clubhouse. And I can remember several times when we'd be playing something and they'd be rehearsing a song. Tom would just bring the songs in on guitar. At that point, he realized it's better not to do a demo. Because if you do a demo of a song, then you're people are going to be kind of locked into what that is. Mm-hmm. And he trusted the guys enough to know that if he just shows up with an acoustic guitar and plays the thing, the arrangement will happen on the floor. Mm-hmm. And that to me is just the magic, of that creation. So we made several albums, and these guys would just do the arrangements on the spot, and they'd play it. And they'd get a song going, and we'd come into the control room to listen to it, and we'd go, "Oh, this is great." And Tom goes, "Yeah, but we've done that kind of thing before." So he was always looking. Mm-hmm. He was always looking to go somewhere he hadn't been before, right. Which is, he wants this new album not to be a rehash of something that people have already heard.
Yes.
He wants to find a way to keep it fresh and inspire the band and inspire himself and just keep that thing going. And
evolve.
And he did. And he, that Hypnotic Eye album, the last studio album that we did, I'm very proud of.
Very.
Yeah, and it did go to number one. So the story was that the Damn the Torpedoes was doing really well, mm-hmm. climbing up the charts, and then it hit the wall.
Okay.
It hit the wall. It hit The Wall by Pink Floyd.
That is unbelievable.
And it just bumped up against the wall. The wall stayed at number one for whatever.
Yeah. The Wall was an incredible album. Like being in the creative zone. And what is that like for you?
Well, it's fun. It's funny. We talked on the phone earlier. I found this tape that I made for a recording class at the tender age of, I think, 24.
We won't talk
ages. I was telling people that, here's the secret, kids, to be a good engineer. And it really was the thing that I had learned then, and I still learn now, is just being willing to just do whatever it takes and try things. Mm-hmm. And don't shut down people's ideas. Let people, if somebody has a weird idea, you can go with it. And you can go with it, and as soon as you hear it back, you'll know if it worked or not.
Leave your ego at the door.
Yeah, well, it's just stay in the zone, because the creativity is where when you go in a different direction, you're going to discover something. Mm-hmm. So I told engineers the three most important words are "you got it."
Yeah.
Like if somebody wants me to do something, okay, you got it.
You got it.
But I might not think it's a good idea, but you got it, because we're going to do it and we're going to discover it. And you know what? I might be wrong.
Yeah.
And I have been wrong plenty of times. I mean, sometimes when you just go off on weird tangents. Okay. There was a song called "Sins of My Youth" on the Hypnotic Eye album. And we were playing it down, and it was just, it was going okay. But once again, Tom was like, it just sounds like the same thing. He goes, let's just take a break, take a break and just take 5, come back to it. And we're as we're sitting there, Steve Ferrone starts playing, he's just messing around. He starts playing this bossa nova beat, boom, and we're sitting there, and Patty and I just both look at each other and go,
That's it.
That's it. That's the groove.
That's the groove.
And
Keep going.
we brought him back in, and we did that song with the bossa nova groove.
Oh, that's awesome.
And it was just great.
Yeah.
It was just one of those things, just stay in the zone.
Stay in the zone.
And other times it would be like, Tom would say, we could spend another 3 hours trying to make this better, but it's only going to get a little bit better.
Right.
You know what I mean? We could do this, and I've done this before, but let's not.
Right.
Let's just put this away. We'll come back to it tomorrow.
Listen to it with a fresh.
Or there's sometimes it is good to just know that you're beating yourself up. If you're on the 10th take of something, and it's not happening, these guys, the Heartbreakers, usually got it. I'd say second or third take at the most, at the latest. That was usually the golden zone for those guys.
How do you know when you're done with a song or an album? How do you say, okay, we're done?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's a tough one, but you can feel it. I think you can feel it. I think when there's consensus, I know that Tom was really good at that. He'd work really hard at stuff and do his best to get it right, and gave everyone else the space to do it right too. Nobody gave me a hard time about spending a little more time mixing. Of course, by that time I had my own studio. So I'd take the hard drives back to my house and tweak on them and do all my little things. And then I thought it was good enough. Then I'd take it back to Tom's house in his studio, and we'd make those final adjustments. But I think when you just realize that it's just where it needs to be, and that's it. At some point, you have to let the song go and let it live its own life. You realize that, you're kind of, and I think that all the artists that I've known that have been the great songwriters just know that they're kind of the vessel that it just goes through. So at some point, the song wants to stand up and run away from home. It's like, I'm good, I'm on my own.
Yes.
And then it usually just let go of it, and it becomes what it is.
Yeah. And it takes with the fans and everything else.
Yeah, and generally, I really don't have that feeling when I hear something back that I've worked on, it's maybe 10 years old or whatever. I always like it better than when I was working on it, because I was so aware of every little tiny flaw and everything like that when I'm doing it. When you listen back to it over time, you just kind of see what the whole thing is, and it's like, wow, that's really nice.
That sounds good.
I just listened to the Mudcrutch album for the first time, probably in years, the other night. And it's like, wow, what a fun album. What a cool thing.
Yeah, and I think Mudcrutch is the one who played at the Cal State Northridge fundraiser.
That's right.
It was October. It was before Halloween. I think it was the 30th. And I had brought my kids. So they got to see an intimate 500-seat theater show with Tom, but was with the Mudcrutch guys.
Yeah, that was a great show.
It was a great show.
Yeah.
It was incredible.
If you are enjoying listening to Hidden History of Rock and Roll, please consider becoming a friend of the show on Patreon for only $5 a month. Your support will help deliver more excellent content. Plus, as a member, get your questions answered by the next legendary guest. Thanks for being the best part of Hidden History of Rock and Roll.
Okay, so we were talking about being in the creative zone and what that's like for you.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is I think the thing that is the most magical about working in a studio and recording things is that you're making things that can potentially be immortal. Yeah. And I like that.
Yeah.
I like the idea that, what a record really is it's a slice of time that gets put out there that people can take into their hearts and souls, and then when they hear it again, they're back in that same place.
Yes.
So it's a time machine.
Exactly.
And my first experience of that was really early on when I had that job in that first studio. There was an artist, the guy who was producing had an artist named Robert John, and Robert had a song that he was working on, and he decided that he wanted to just take the time to do the vocals the way he wanted to do them. And he said, look, I just want to go in the studio with Ryan. I just want just Ryan to engineer it. I just want to take my time and do it. So, okay. So he goes in with me, and I'm like, wow, I'm all by myself. Wow, that's cool. And he says to me, it's fine. Just tell me if you don't hear, if there's anything that doesn't sound good, let me know. I'm like, what? Really?
Whoa.
So we got through it, and he's such a great singer. And we stacked vocals, and we did harmonies, and this record is, the song that we were working on is called Sad Eyes. Mm-hmm. And it got released on the album, and the label picked it to be the single. It got put on the charts. It went to number one single.
Wow.
And I just remember walking along the beach in Santa Monica, and it's coming out of everybody's radio.
Oh, wow.
And it's like, hey, that's that thing that like a few months ago, it was just me and this guy in this little room.
Oh, my God.
And
that's
now
huge.
all of a sudden it's this thing.
Yeah.
And
it's everywhere.
it was just shows you the power of what that is, and just how special it is, and how it's kind of a sacred thing. I mean,
Absolutely.
to me it is. I think some of the studios that are around, to me, they're kind of like, if music is your religion, there's some amazing temples, Capitol Record, East West Village,
Yes.
some of these places just where they make these amazing things that touch people. And so that's something.
Music is, I think for a lot of people, doesn't matter what kind of music it is. My kids listen to, they listen to different music, but I taught them to listen to rock. That was their foundation was rock music and Tom Petty and all that.
Right. So,
but music is everybody's, I think, sort of religion at one point or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to take a minute and talk about your solo music. First of all, I want to know who influenced you. I've listened to your music and I love it. It's fantastic.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of favorites already. We've listened to it several times. But who influenced you?
Well, I think when I was a kid, for me, music started the night the Beatles were on the Ed Sullivan Show.
I get that a lot.
I was around music obviously because my dad was a musician, and we hear soundtrack albums that he had played on, and he had a really cool stereo. It had a Macintosh amplifier, mono, and this big old speaker and this turntable and stuff. So I was always around music my whole life. But in terms of music that I could relate to, that was my music. Mm-hmm. It was the night that my older sisters said, hey, the Beatles are going to be on TV. And it's like, boom.
Wow.
And I just remember sitting there watching, we were in the family room with our black and white TV, and there's the Beatles. And I still have that night just etched into my memory. So I was born in 1956. So, this is, so I'm like 8 years old or something like that. But to me, that's just
everything.
So I became a Beatles fan. I became a Monkees fan. I actually saw the preview of the Monkees. They had this place called the Preview House up on Sunset Strip, where they would actually test TV shows for people.
Get out.
Yeah. So it was, and you had a dial. You had a dial that you could turn. You turned it, like if you turned it all the way to the left, you were bored.
Whoa.
And if you turned it all the way to the right, you thought this was really good.
Okay.
And as the show's going, you can turn the dial, and somehow they register that, and they give a report, to the
test audience.
Yes, the test audiences. So the guy says, we're going to watch a TV show that's going to be about Tarzan. So we watched the pilot of the Tarzan show with Ron Ely. Okay. Right? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, Tarzan, whatever. And he goes, now we're going to watch a show about this rock and roll band. And, they're not really a band, but they're going to be on the show. And I'm like, oh, who wants to see a show about a fake rock and roll band? So we watched the Monkees.
Oh my gosh.
Here we come, walking down the street, at the funniest looks from everyone we meet. Hey, and I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty good. So I became a Monkees fan, and I bought the Last Train to Clarksville, the first single. Yeah, I bought all those records. I bought the first Beatles album I bought was Revolver. I was just into that. So Beatles, Monkees, Beach Boys, because you're just, I grew up in Southern California, so you can't the not. Beach Boys are everywhere.
Yeah.
Right?
Can't not.
And then when I was in 1969, I found my band. And my band was this band. My cousin said to me, hey, I've got this double album, and it's a rock opera. And I went, a rock opera? You know, 11-year-old me goes,
Very discerning.
So she puts on Tommy by The Who.
Oh.
And The Who, I just realized, okay, the Beatles were my sister's band, but The Who, that's my band. So I became a huge Who fan.
Okay.
Right. And then after that, I think we were in my friend's car a couple of years later, and now my friend could drive. And we heard this on FM radio late at night. They played this really long, spacey song that just went on forever. And it was just the most amazing thing. And the guy says, that was Echoes by Pink Floyd.
Oh.
So it was Echoes from the album called Metal,
yes.
which was the album before Dark Side of the Moon.
Oh, wow.
And so I became a huge Pink Floyd fan. And so that's another one that's just kind of really big. Yeah.
I can hear the Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Definitely in Home.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Dreamland, I love.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to take a quick minute and listen to the song Dreamland.
Leave your past behind. Come expand your mind. Fall into the sand of the promised land. A guitar. Brian wrote songs, they made him a star. Charlie went mad and his friends took it way too far. Kelly came out here surfing for fame. Steve believed he could kill the mainframe. My grandfather's father arrived to hide his shame. This is the west coast of make-believe, where we're lost in the dream that we all can achieve. Some make it happen, others pretend. Some crash and burn, but you do what you want in the end. Howard came out here learning to fly. Timothy dropped out, we all got high. Walt drew a mouse and he worked for the FBI. That's right. Dad built a house on Malibu Beach. Elron got rich when he learned to preach. Glenn checked out, but Don ain't ready to leave. This is the west coast of make-believe, where we're lost in the dream that we all can achieve. Some make it happen, others pretend. Some crash and burn, but you do what you want in the end. Leave your past behind. Come expand your mind. Fall into the sand of the promised land. This is the west coast of make-believe, so beware of your dreams that you just might achieve. Some make it happen, others pretend. Some crash and burn, but you do what you want in the end. You can do what you want in the end. We all do what we want in the end. In California dreamland,
That song was fantastic. I love it. I love the feel of it. It's such a great song. And what is that? Anything for you, memories recording it or feelings recording it?
Well, it's kind of the autobiographical tune, right? It's always, it's California Girls, it's California Dreamin', it's Californication, whatever. Everybody seems to have a California song, so that was my kind of California song, and the musicians I have on it are just fantastic. I've got Steve Ferroni, who played on this album, and Steve just did such an amazing job. I kind of did stand in kind of just basic sequenced drum parts to just have something to play to. And then he came in and he listened to my little drums and he goes, okay, you can turn those off now. I don't need those. And he just brought this authority to the tracks. He's one of those guys that there's not one hit that he hits that's wrong. You know what I mean? He's very economical, but he doesn't. There's not a lot of kind of stuff. But he's just so powerful. He knows exactly what thing to punctuate. He's very conscious of what the song is and where the vocal is and everything. Did a great job on that. And then on guitar, this is a guy named Josh Hove. And Josh I met because he was in a band called The Shelters that Tom was producing, and I co-produced as well as Josh and Chase Simpson, who were two guys in the band. And he's such a great guitarist. And he's one of those guys that you can sit down with. And we did all the tracks where basically he'd just be sitting in the control room with me, and we'd run a line out to his amplifier in the studio, so we got the sound out there. But he was there, and I'd sing him a lick, and he'd go, yeah, and then he'd find a way to make it a little bit better, and then we'd double it, and then we just kept on going like that with all these parts, And he came up with that little surf tag thing at the end, the little Hawaiian kind of thing.
Love that.
Oh, it's just beautiful, and it was such a fun process, and we did it specifically. I put a lot more tracks on it because I just kind of like lots of tracks.
Yeah,
and
sounds good.
And we mixed it in stereo, but we also mixed it in immersive, and that's really fun because it's 7/1 It means you have 3 speakers in front of you, 2 speakers on the side, 2 speakers behind you, and then 4 speakers up in the corners. Okay. So you have all these dimensions that you can put the sound into. And I went ahead and did the album. I did the parts for the album thinking that I'd have things to put in all these speakers. And I mixed it that way and submitted it. And it actually did get nominated for the Immersive Audio Album Grammy. It lost to Alicia Keys.
Nomination
but
is
Alicia
good.
Keys. Well,
Alicia Keys.
Yes, I am a 4-time Grammy loser. So
you're a 4-time Grammy nominee.
Yes. Well, yes, kind of. Yeah.
Well, you can download his music on Apple Music, Amazon. Is this Tidal?
Yeah.
And I don't know how.
It's called Qobuz.
Qobuz. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's also immersiveaudio.com.
It's immersiveaudioalbum.com.
Album.com.
And
okay,
you have to have the right kind of gear to get this, but you can actually download these files, and they sound amazing.
So any engineers out there that can do that?
Well, actually, if you go to the site, they'll tell you what you need to do.
Oh.
But I'm convinced that not everyone obviously has this kind of a playback system.
Right.
But you can play some of this stuff back on a 5.1 system, like a home theater.
Oh, that's cool.
And I really hope that we can get to the point to where people are able to hear this immersive audio, and especially through speakers. It's really something when you're in the room. It really takes it to a whole other level.
Mm-hmm. But so we do have a few questions from our Hidden History of Rock and Roll fans.
Sure.
That I can start in with you, if you're all good with that.
Yeah.
The first one comes from a good friend of mine. She and I have been friends since we were young. Her dad, her name is Letitia Holland. She's in Los Angeles. Her dad was Brian Holland of Holland Dozier Holland.
Of course.
So, she's got a history there. No. She wanted to know, what Tom Petty song did you work on that turned out to be a hit that maybe you didn't think would be a hit?
I hate to say this, but I never think about a song, whether it's a hit or not.
Okay.
I just don't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just in the moment with the song. and that's all I'm thinking about. I don't know. Then of course there's the song that I like.
Mm-hmm.
There's some, and at the end you go, wow, there's a couple of them that are really something.
Mm-hmm.
But I really can't think of any particular thing. There's a song called Fault Lines on the Hypnotic Eye album that I just love. That's one of my favorites. I guess I could just say my favorite songs, but to me that it's Good to Be King.
Well,
from
maybe
Wildflowers.
something like that was played on the radio and it's a bigger hit, and you thought, wow, I didn't realize that would be a hit.
Well, okay, here's one. So I have a radio show that I've only done a couple of them, but it's called Behind the Glass.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a show where I found we were working on the Wildflowers album, and I found a bunch of outtakes of just them just screwing around in the studio.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is Tom's just making it up, and it's called Juju Beads. Right?
Yes.
It's called My Rash Healed Up since I've been using them Juju Beads. Yes. Prickly heat is gone since I'm wearing them Juju Beads. And, it's so fun. It's
Everybody loves
it.
it.
And then Mark Felsut, who is, very, very
Tom Petty
involved
Radio.
in Tom Petty Radio. He said they did a thing where they had everyone's favorite tracks. Mm-hmm. And somehow Juju Beads got
on there.
was on the list.
Yeah.
So there's a song that I didn't expect would be a hit.
Didn't expect it. Yeah. Neil and I did our Tom Petty Radio 5 favorite songs. It was really hard to pick 5. I mean,
yeah, that's right.
Hello. How do you pick 5?
Yeah.
5 favorites. It's hard.
I think the thing is, honestly, I think that it would be fun to do. And I think sometimes I'd want to find the 5 deep tracks.
Yeah.
There's some songs to me, like the Trip to Pirates Cove from Mojo. Mm-hmm. To me, that's one of my favorite tracks ever of anything.
Yeah.
It's just so trippy and weird.
Yeah.
And it just puts you in this place. So,
Mojo's a great album.
Mojo's a fantastic album.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We did It's Good to Be King live. It's one of my favorites. I love how you think it's going to end, and then it just keeps going and going, and they just keep. Yeah. It's just, and everybody's singing, and.
Was that from the one at the Fillmore?
Yeah. Yeah. Live at the Fillmore.
Yeah, that was such a great album, and it was really fun on that album because they had 4 nights that they had recorded there, and we did what Tom would have done. We just took the best takes from each of those nights. We didn't do every night a different, same thing. Right. We found the best version of that, and pretty much covered every song that they played. And they did so many covers. That shows you how good they are.
Yes.
They'd do these cover songs and they wouldn't rehearse them because everybody in the band knew them. I mean, Ferroni knew it from when he was in England, and they didn't ever play them together. But they all played them in their various bands, at that point.
Right.
So, it was quite impressive.
They were such a tight band and so tight knit. Mike Campbell and Tom were just incredible together. So I'll move on to my next question. Denise McCarty Everett of Lakeland, Florida asks, what was different about working with Tom versus other musicians?
Well, I think every musician has their own personality and their own vibe. Tom is very funny, so he's a fun person to work with.
He's a Libra.
Yeah, Libra.
They're amazing.
They're great.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you know any Libras?
No, I don't.
I don't think so. And just for the record, Ryan is September 28th.
Yeah.
I am September 30th.
Yeah.
And Tom he's October 20th, 1955.
But I think the thing about Tom that is unique, or let's put it this way, the thing about Tom that is like all the great people that I've worked with, but he was really good at it, is just giving people the space to be creative around him, not shutting it down. He would bring out the best in people. He would, and that's what I loved about him. He brought the best in people, and then they just put their best out there. And we got so much better stuff because he was just willing to be generous enough to give people the space to contribute. He
was just the most generous person in life and in the recording studio, sounds like.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. Lastly, we have Laura Jean from Tularosa, New Mexico. She wants to know, well, it's kind of a similar question. How was Tommy to work with? Was he a perfectionist?
He wanted it to be right, for sure. He wasn't obsessive about stuff, but I'll give you an example. We were about to go, it was a song, and on the Hypnotic Eye album, we were set to go master it, which is when it's all done, you go to the mastering place. We're going to work with at Bernie Grumman Mastering. I was going to work with Chris Bellman, who's my mastering engineer for many years over there. And we were about to go there, like we were going to go on Friday. And I think on Thursday, I get a call from him. He says, hey, you got to come over. I've got a couple better lines for the third verse of this song, right? I forget which one it was.
Changing.
And so we go in there, and I haven't, since everything's in Pro Tools, you can just pretty much open the file up and it's all sitting there. So I put up a mic and he came up with a better line on a couple better lines on the third verse. And it's like, Tom, I'm glad you called me because those are better lines.
Those are way better.
Yeah. And he felt the same way. So that's the kind of thing he would do.
So yeah, perfectionist, but in a good way.
Well, not in a way that would screw things up.
Right.
Not in a way like, no, stop everything. We always delivered everything on time.
Yeah.
We hit our marks. Yeah.
Yeah. That is amazing. I got to listen to albums in the studio with him after they were all said and done, before they were released to the public, and I always felt like it was magical hearing the albums for the first time.
Yeah, and he believed in albums too. That's the other thing that's really important. He really believed in an album having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And he always told me the classic story is that the first song makes you want to listen to the second song. The song at the end of side one wants to make you flip it over.
Yeah.
Side two gets you there, and then the last song's so good you might want to hear the whole album again. so you could, so it really is about telling a story, and that's sometimes why some of these albums didn't necessarily have these other great tracks in them. They just didn't fit into the flow of the thing. He was very much into that, and I'm still a big fan of vinyl. I'm still a big fan of CDs, actually, only because it makes you sit down. You have to go through this process to get the thing queued up. It means you're more invested in listening to the whole thing. We have this new album, the Long After Dark Deluxe Edition, also has a Blu-ray disc when you buy it. So you get 2 CDs and you get a Blu-ray. Now, the Blu-ray has super duper high resolution stereo, but it also has this Dolby Atmos mix. Once again, you can play it on your home theater, or you can, if you have a Dolby Atmos system, you can play it there. I like that because what it means is you're going to be invested in hearing the whole thing, as opposed to the way streaming works, where as soon as they get to one song, they'll just throw something else on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. I would love to hear that in the Dolby frame, you know. I was with you at the Wildflower screening, the movie, and that sounded incredible.
Yeah.
You said you worked with the sound engineer on that.
Yeah, I helped her. I just gave her some mixes of things. That was really all they're doing.
It was really good.
Yeah, they did a great job.
They did a great job. The movie was fantastic. I shed a couple tears, and it was nice to see him and hear him again. Yeah, physically see him, but that was fun. And then we also met at the Wildflowers release party when they did the individual release.
Right.
I believe. Yeah. That was fun too.
That was fun. Yeah.
That was a fun night. So before we go, this has been an incredible honor for me to have you here. I want to give a shout out to my engineer, Dean Springs. He does all the engineering on all my tapes here, my recordings.
Yes.
And do you have any advice for future artists or future engineers?
I think my advice is I think the first thing is you really have to want to do it because it's not easy. Obviously there's a huge barrier to entry. I think there's less now because you can get your own stuff and do your own thing. But you really have to want to do it. And I think that, like I said before, that staying open to people's ideas, being an agreeable person, being someone that people want to hang out with. It seems to me like the good engineers always have a kind of an agreeable personality because, back in the day, you're trapped in this little tiny room with somebody for 12 hours at a time. They've got to be kind of cool. So just try and be cool and try and be accommodating. Let the magic happen. Do a really good job of knowing what you're doing. Don't necessarily involve people in the technical side of things, especially musicians, because what you're doing in the studio, if you're making music, albums kind of thing, rock or whatever, pop, you're making music. So the more you know about music, the better you are. So it's just, if someone says, I want to go back into the third bar of this, whatever, you should know what the third bar of that is.
Right. Well versed on everything.
Yeah, you really, the more you can know about music, really the better it is. Mm-hmm. And, I've also told people that, you can get a good recording setup and you can go and record bands, and you might learn something.
Mm-hmm. The ice cream man is still,
he's coming back.
He knows we're jonesing for some ice cream over here, even though it is cold outside. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for joining me today. It has been my pleasure, and I love talking about all things Tom Petty, of course, and I cannot wait for this episode to air.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining me on Hidden History of Rock and Roll. Find me on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Music, iHeartRadio, and on Patreon. Become a friend of the show and get your questions answered by our next guest.
We hope you enjoyed the latest installment of the Hidden History of Rock and Roll. Be sure to like us on Facebook and follow us on all the podcast platforms. Thanks for listening to the Hidden History of Rock and Roll with your host, Tiffany Scott.